Hello everybody, I'm Dr. Sadek. Welcome to our teaching channel, and today we'll be discussing how to calculate the heart rate on an ECG. The first step to ECG interpretation is calculating the heart rate. There are multiple ways to do it. I'm going to show you 3 ways today: the counting method, the precise method, and the average method. Most people will use the counting method as their main approach, but it's useful to know all 3 of them. For the counting method, you need to find a QRS that lands close to the beginning of a large square, and then count the number of large squares until the next QRS complex. And the sequence of numbers are 300, 150, 100, 75, 60, 50. Most people will stop right there and just remember that sequence: 300, 150, 100, 75, 60, 50. If you want to go further, you can remember 43, 37, and 33. If you haven't figured it out already, all this is taking the number 300 and dividing by the number of large squares. So if you have 1 large square, it's 300, 2, 150, 3 is 100, etc., etc. So let's do a live example. Here's a strip. You have the P waves, the QRS complexes, and the T waves, and here you have 4 QRS complexes. We're going to pick the one that lands on a dark line in the beginning of a large square. When we pick this one, we'll count the number of large squares until we reach the next QRS complexes. Counting each square at a time, we have 300, 150, 100, 75, 60, 50. The next QRS complex lands between 50 and 60. So if we were to estimate, the heart rate is somewhere between 55 and 58 beats per minute. So we can say that heart rate is approximately 55 beats per minute. The next method is the precise method. If you want the exact heart rate, here we're going to have to actually count the number of large and small squares and figure out how many milliseconds they correspond to. The key component here is 1 small square is 40 milliseconds on an ECG. That's 0.04 seconds. 1 large square is 200 milliseconds on an ECG. That's 0.2 seconds. 5 large squares is thus 1000 milliseconds, which is 1 second. Once you actually count the number of squares and figure out how many milliseconds are between 2 QRS complexes, now you take this formula. Heart rate is equal to 60,000 divided by the number of milliseconds between the 2 QRS complexes. Let's do another example. Here's our initial example. We're going to count the number of large boxes, and we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 large boxes, and we have 1.5 small boxes. We know that every large square is equal to 200 milliseconds. So 5 large squares are equal to 1000 milliseconds. We know that every small square is equal to 40 milliseconds. So 1.5 small squares is equal to 60 milliseconds. The total between the 2 QRS complexes is 1060 milliseconds. So the heart rate is 60,000 divided by 1060 milliseconds, which equals 56 beats per minute. So that will give you the exact heart rate in a more precise manner. The third method is the average method. This is very, very useful when the heart rate is not regular. So if the QRS complexes are regular, like we see on this ECG, you can simply take 2 QRS complexes, count between them, and figure out the heart rate of the whole strip. However, if the QRS complexes are irregular, for example, if the patient is in atrial fibrillation, which causes the heart rate to be irregular, then it's better to take an average. This is an example of a patient that has atrial fibrillation, and you see that the heart rate is irregular. If you were to pick 2 QRS complexes to calculate the heart rate, you may pick ones that are farther apart or ones that are closer together, and this will give you a completely different number. But it's more clinically relevant to figure out the average heart rate over a longer period of time. To do so clinically, you would take the pulse and count the number of beats in 10 seconds and multiply by 6, or count the number of beats in 6 seconds and multiply by 10. We will do the same thing on an ECG strip. So we're going to count the number of QRS complexes in 6 seconds. Now we did say that every second is equal to 5 large squares. So you will see on a normal ECG that every 5 squares, there is a line indicating that you have reached 1 second. So we will count the number of QRS complexes in 6 seconds. And in this case, if we do that, we get 12 QRS complexes. Now we take that number and multiply it by 10 to get the average number of QRS complexes over a minute. And that will give us 12 times 10 is 120 beats per minute. So we can use this method to average out the heart rate over 6 seconds and use that to get the heart rate over a minute. So 12 QRS complexes over 6 seconds will give you approximately 120 beats per minute. All these methods are very applicable. In the case of a regular heart rate, I would use the counting method. In the case of an irregular heart rate, I would use the average method. And if you need the exact number, you can use the precise method. I hope that was helpful. If you like these videos, please subscribe to our channel and we'll come up with more teaching videos in the future. Thank you.